I was sitting at the kitchen table, striking the final line off the logistics inventory list for the upcoming drill. 10:47 p.m. The villa in Wichita was submerged in the perfect, tedious silence of a Tuesday night like any other. That peace shattered when my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the cold marble countertop. The screen lit up with a name that made my stomach knot instantly. Sheriff Miller, Hutchinson area code. The world around me seemed to stop spinning. The pen in my hand dropped to the floor, rolling away aimlessly. A cold draft raced down my spine, not from the air conditioning, but from a soldier's valid instinct regarding death. I looked over at Clark, my husband. He was still sleeping soundly on the sofa, completely unaware that my world had just collapsed. I slid my trembling finger to answer, trying to keep my voice steady. Lieutenant Sophie Lee? The sheriff's voice was distorted by the static of a rainstorm. It is about your father, Walter. His pickup truck was crushed on Highway 96. The rescue team is using hydraulic cutters to extract him. You need to get here immediately. I do not think he will make it through the night. I stood up abruptly, staring out into the pitch-black night screaming outside the window. Why was Dad driving out in this terrible storm? And would I make it in time to keep my oath of leave no man behind with my only remaining relative, or was it already too late? I did not allow myself to cry. Tears do not save lives, action does. In under 5 minutes, my internal switch flipped from daughter to combat mode. I dragged my old deployment duffel bag from under the bed. Into it went the essentials: a tactical flashlight, my personal trauma kit, and a spare set of fatigues. My hands finally shook, just for a second, as I folded my father's old red flannel shirt, the one I kept just to smell that familiar scent of hard winter wheat and diesel. The master bedroom, a sprawling 50 square meters of luxury, suddenly felt as cold as a morgue. I was packing out. I felt exactly as I did before a deployment to a combat zone, preparing for a mission with no estimated time of return. The sharp sound of the zipper hissing shut cut through the quiet room. On the king-sized bed, a mound of expensive Egyptian cotton shifted. Clark groaned, scrunching his face in irritation at being disturbed. Sophie, what the hell are you doing at this hour? It is barely 11 at night. His voice was slurred, thick with sleep and heavy with accusation. My father was in an accident, Clark. He's critical, I said, my voice choking slightly. I paused. In that split second, I waited. I waited for him to throw the covers off. I waited for a hug. I waited for him to say, I'll drive you. But he didn't move. Clark just rubbed his eyes and pulled the duvet up over his head, cocooning himself back into comfort. It is storming bad out there, honey. Just go in the morning. It is too dangerous for the Mercedes right now. Let me sleep. I have that meeting with the angel investors tomorrow. The sentence hit me harder than the news of the crash. Too dangerous for the Mercedes. I stood there, gripping the handle of my bag, looking at the man I had shared a bed with for 5 years. A wave of nausea rose in my throat, a visceral disgust. To him, my father's life weighed less than the paint job on a German luxury car. You go back to sleep, Clark, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Don't worry about your investment. I did not say another word. I turned on my heel, grabbed the keys to my own vehicle, the battered, reliable Ford F-150 pickup that Clark hated parking in the driveway, and ran out into the gale. The storm was violent. Rain hammered against the windshield like thousands of bullets. The wipers were thrashing at maximum speed but could barely slice through the deluge. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing the truck to 80 miles per hour on the slick asphalt of Highway 96. The wind howled, shaking the heavy frame of the truck, but I held the wheel with a white-knuckled grip. Every mile marker that flashed by was a prayer. Flashbacks flooded my mind. I remembered being 16, sitting in this very truck's predecessor. Dad's rough, calloused hand had rested over mine on the steering wheel, making me feel safe, grounded. Don't fear the storm, Sophie, he had told me then, his voice gravelly and warm. You keep your eyes on the lane. You drive through it. Now, I was driving through the storm of my life, and for the first time, I realized I was doing it completely alone. When I finally skidded into the parking lot of Hutchinson Regional Medical Center, the air smelled of ozone and dread. Inside, the hospital corridors reeked of antiseptic and despair. The attending doctor met me outside the ICU. He looked exhausted. He shook his head before I could even ask. Severe traumatic brain injury. Glasgow Coma Scale is at a 3. Lieutenant, you should prepare yourself for the worst. I stood frozen in front of the glass wall of the intensive care unit. There he was, my father. The man who was once strong enough to carry 2 bales of hay on his shoulders now looked incredibly small. He was wrapped in white gauze, connected to a dozen tubes and machines that beeped in a rhythmic, terrifying cadence. Beep, beep, beep. I placed my hand against the cold glass. The heat of my palm left a fleeting print on the surface. The tears I'd held back finally broke through, hot and stinging. I leaned my forehead against the window and whispered the Marine Corps oath he had taught me before I ever put on a uniform. Semper Fidelis, I choked out. Always faithful. I will not leave you behind, Dad, I vowed to the silence, even if I have to fight the whole world to save you. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the heavy double doors of the waiting room swung open. Clark walked in. In the midst of the chaotic, sterile hallway filled with weeping families and rushing nurses, my husband looked like he had just stepped out of a photo shoot for GQ magazine. He was wearing a slate gray Italian wool suit that I knew cost more than my father's truck. His hair was gelled back to perfection, not a single strand out of place. In his hands, he carried 2 cardboard cups from Starbucks. The contrast was nauseating. I caught my own reflection in the glass of the nurse's station. Mud-stained boots, a torn flannel shirt, dark circles under my eyes that looked like bruises, and hair that hadn't seen a brush in 12 hours. He didn't rush to me. He didn't drop the coffee to pull me into a hug. He didn't ask, "Is he alive?" Instead, he walked over, wrinkled his nose as the smell of bleach and old blood hit him, and extended a cup toward me. "God, Sophie, you look terrible," he said, his voice lowered not out of respect, but embarrassment. "Have you called the office to request time off yet? You know we cannot afford to miss the quarterly report deadline. It sends a bad signal to the board." I took the cup. It was light, lukewarm, just like the heart of the man standing before me. "Dad is still in a coma, Clark," I said, my voice raspy. "He hasn't woken up." Clark sighed, checking his vintage Omega watch. He sat down on the vinyl chair next to me, crossing his legs elegantly. Instead of reaching for my trembling hand, he reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out his iPad Pro. He tapped the screen, his manicured fingernails making a sharp click, click, click sound that echoed in the quiet corner. "I have been running the numbers while I waited for my latte," Clark said, his tone shifting into his professional boardroom voice. "I looked up the rates for this facility. A severe traumatic brain injury requiring this level of care, you are looking at roughly $10,000 a day for the ICU. That is just room and board, Sophie. That does not include the surgery, the anesthesia, or the specialists." He looked up from the glowing screen, staring me dead in the eye. There was zero emotion, just calculation. "Does Walter have Medicare Part A or Part B? Does he have a supplemental plan to cover the 20% gap? What about his retirement fund? Does he have a 401k? I stared at him, blinking slowly. My father was fighting for his life 50 feet away, and Clark was conducting an audit. I don't know the details yet, Clark," I stammered. "But we have savings. We have the joint account." Clark's face hardened. He closed the cover of his iPad with a final, dismissive snap. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Sophie, be realistic. Our liquid cash is tied up in that commercial real estate project down south. If we pull out now to pay for this, we lose our leverage. We do not have idle cash to burn on a lost cause." I squeezed the coffee cup so hard the lid popped off. Lukewarm latte spilled over my knuckles, dripping onto the dirty floor. "That is my father, Clark," I hissed, standing up. "He is not a bad investment. He is a human being." Clark stood up too, dusting an invisible speck of lint off his lapel. He put a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, like a shackle. "Sophie, look at the facts. The doctor said his chance of survival is under 10%. Even if he wakes up, he will be a vegetable. He will require 24-hour care. Do you really plan to throw our future out the window to maintain a body that has no soul left? He leaned in closer, his expensive cologne choking me. Pulling the plug is the most humane thing to do right now, he said softly. And frankly, it is the most economic decision. Don't let your emotions cloud your financial judgment. A ringing sound filled my ears, drowning out the hospital noise. It was the sound of my own rage boiling over. If you believe that family is worth more than any amount of money, please like this episode and comment "Family First" below to show your support for Sophie. Humane? I shoved his hand off my shoulder. Is that what you call it? Or are you just afraid this will cut into your budget for a new set of golf clubs? Get out, Clark. He looked at me, stunned that his logic hadn't worked. His expression shifted from fake concern to cold indifference. He adjusted his silk tie. Fine. Play the role of the grieving, irrational daughter, he sneered. But I am warning you, Sophie. You are not just dealing with me. He took a step back, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Mom and Dad are on their way. My father is very unhappy that you abandoned your post last night. And Mother. He paused, shaking his head. Evelyn does not like it when the family assets are threatened. They are coming to have a sensible conversation with you. Clark turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically down the hallway. I stood alone in the cold corridor, shivering. The storm outside had passed, but I realized with a sinking heart that the real hurricane was just beginning. The Langford family was coming, and they were coming to crush me. The arrival of Charles and Evelyn Langford was not a family visit. It was an invasion. They walked into the Hutchinson Hospital like royalty descending into a slum for a mandatory photo opportunity. Charles was wearing a bespoke navy suit that I knew cost more than my entire annual salary as a logistics officer. Evelyn, his wife, was draped in a cashmere shawl, trailing a cloud of Chanel No. 5 so thick it choked out the smell of antiseptic in the corridor. They did not look toward the ICU where my father lay fighting for his life. They did not even glance at the window. Charles lifted his wrist, checking his gold Rolex. The heavy metal glinted under the fluorescent lights. We have 15 minutes, Sophie, he announced, his voice booming with the authority of a man who owned half the town's manufacturing sector. I have a tea time with the senator at 2 o'clock. Traffic is going to be a nightmare. Evelyn stepped closer to me. She reached out, pinching the hem of my mud-stained flannel shirt with 2 manicured fingers, as if she were handling a biohazard. Good Lord, look at you, she sniffed, her lip curling in distaste. You are embarrassing the Langford name, Sophie. A woman of class never allows herself to look like a homeless person, even when unfortunate things happen. Unfortunate things? I repeated, my voice trembling. My father is dying, Evelyn. Hush now. She waved her hand dismissively. Let us go somewhere private. People are staring. They herded me into the small family waiting room at the end of the hall and closed the door. The air in the small room instantly became suffocating. This was not a consultation. This was a tribunal. Charles didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room, dominating the space. He got straight to the point. Clark tells me you are considering brain surgery for the old man? Charles asked, his tone incredulous. Listen to me, Sophie. You need to stop being sentimental. The genes of the Harris family are, how do I put this politely, peasant stock. They are the genes of failures. Farmers who spend their whole lives scratching at the dirt and never amounting to anything. My breath hitched in my throat. I looked at Clark, sitting in the corner, studying his shoes. Charles reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a checkbook. The sound of him tearing a check was sharp and final, like a judge's gavel. Here is $10,000, Charles said, extending the slip of paper toward me. This is enough for a very dignified funeral service and cremation. Pull the plug, Sophie. It is the most economic solution for all of us. Do not let your womanly emotions drain my son's assets. I stared at the check. $10,000. He was pricing my father's life cheaper than the catering bill for his last Christmas party. He was treating my father like expired inventory that needed to be written off. You are talking about killing him, I whispered. I'm talking about risk management, Charles snapped. I turned to my husband. This was his moment. This was the moment he was supposed to step up, to be the man he promised he was at the altar. Clark? I pleaded, my voice cracking. Say something. That is my dad. That is the man who walked me down the aisle. Clark stood there, leaning his expensive suit against the beige wall. He looked at his mother, then at his father. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were empty. Honey, Clark mumbled, his voice small and pathetic. Mom and Dad, they have a point. We need to look at the big picture here. The surgery is a gamble we cannot afford. Please, don't be stubborn. The sound of my heart shattering was louder than the storm outside. It wasn't the poison from Charles or Evelyn that broke me. It was the cowardice of the man I loved. He wasn't my husband. He was just their puppet, and they were pulling his strings right in front of my face. A cold calm washed over me. I stood up straighter, my spine stiffening with the discipline drilled into me by the military and by the very man they were insulting. I remembered the Bible verse Dad used to read at the dinner table. Exodus 20, verse 12. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. I reached out and took the check from Charles's hand. He smirked, thinking he had won. Slowly, deliberately, I tore the check in half. Then I tore it again. And again. I threw the confetti of paper at his polished Italian leather shoes. You might be able to buy this hospital, Charles, I said, my voice low but shaking with a dangerous intensity. But you cannot buy me. Charles's face turned a violent shade of purple. Evelyn gasped, clutching her pearls. I will take unpaid leave, I declared, staring them down. I will sell my truck. I will sell the house. I will sell my own blood if I have to. But I am going to save my father. And I forbid any of you from stepping 1 foot near his room. You dare, Charles roared, stepping forward. You ungrateful little redneck. If you walk out of that door, do not expect to come back to Langford Foods. You are suspended, Sophie, effective immediately. Let us see how you pay for surgery without a paycheck. Go ahead, I said. I turned my back on them. I turned my back on the money, the power, and the man I thought was my partner in life. Just do it, I said over my shoulder. I walked out of the room and slammed the door behind me. I had lost my job. I had lost the support of my husband. I was technically bankrupt. But as I walked back toward the ICU, I realized I had kept the only thing that mattered. I had kept my soul. I moved out of the sprawling Langford villa and into a cheap motel on the west side of Hutchinson, a part of town where the streetlights flickered and the police sirens were the nightly lullaby. My new fortress was room 112 at the Starlight Motor Inn. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke that had seeped into the drywall decades ago, mixed with the damp, earthy scent of black mold blooming in the bathroom corners. The carpet was sticky, and the lock on the door looked like it could be kicked in by a stiff breeze. But it was $45 a night, and right now, $45 was a fortune. I sat on the sagging mattress, staring at my phone. I had tried to buy a sandwich and a bottle of water at the gas station earlier. The card reader had beeped a harsh, rejection tone. Declined. A text message from Clark was waiting for me. It was short, cruel, and precise. I froze the joint accounts and canceled your supplementary credit cards. If you want to act like a child and run away, you can learn a lesson about maturity on your own dime. Come home when you are ready to apologize to Mother. I threw the phone onto the bed. Maturity, he called it. I called it financial strangulation. I looked in the cracked mirror above the dresser. The woman staring back was gaunt, with hollow cheeks and dark circles under her eyes, stripping away every ounce of the proud female officer I used to be. But deep in those sunken sockets, a fire was still burning. I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out a small, worn red velvet box. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside lay 2 items. One was my service watch, a gift from my father when I graduated from officer candidate school. The other was infinitely more precious, my mother's wedding ring. It wasn't like the flashy, diamond-encrusted rock Clark had given me, the one I had left on the nightstand at the villa. Mom's ring was a simple band of 14-karat gold, scratched from years of hard work on the farm, with the names Martha and Walter engraved on the inside in fading script. It was the physical proof of a love that had weathered droughts, tornadoes, and poverty. I slid it onto my pinky finger one last time. It felt warm, like her hand holding mine. "I am so sorry, Mom," I whispered to the empty room. "Please forgive me." I snapped the box shut before I could change my mind. 10 minutes later, I pushed open the heavy glass door of Quick Cash Pawn and Loan on the corner of 4th Avenue. A bell jingled overhead, sounding less like a welcome and more like a death knell for my dignity. The shop was cluttered with the debris of broken American dreams. Rows of power tools, unloved musical instruments, and flat-screen TVs gathering dust. Behind the high counter sat a man who looked like he belonged to the furniture. He was obese, sweating in the air-conditioned room, with thick fingers adorned with gaudy gold rings that dug into his flesh. He didn't greet me. He just jerked his chin. I placed the ring on the glass counter. "I need to sell this." The man picked it up. He didn't handle it with reverence. He stuck a jeweler's loupe in his eye and squinted at it under the harsh desk lamp. He turned it over, weighed it in his palm, and then tossed it onto a digital scale. 14 karat, he grunted, removing the loupe. "Old, lots of surface scratches. The engraving actually lowers the resale value. I have to buff that out." He looked at me with bored, watery eyes. $200. 200, I gasped, my voice rising an octave. "Sir, that is a vintage piece. It is a family heirloom. It is priceless to me." The man shrugged, a ripple of indifference moving through his heavy frame. He picked up the ring and let it drop back onto the glass with a sharp clatter that made me flinch. "Sentiment does not spend, lady. I am buying the gold weight. The spot price of gold is down this week. $200. Take it or leave it." I looked at the ring. Then I thought about the pharmacy bill for my father's antibiotics and the daily fee for the hospital parking. I will take it," I whispered. He opened the register and counted out 10 $20 bills. They were old, soft, and smelled of tobacco. As I watched him sweep my mother's ring into a chaotic drawer filled with other people's lost hopes, I felt like I had just sold a piece of my own soul. $200. It was barely enough to keep us afloat for 48 hours. I walked back to the motel in a daze, the meager cash burning a hole in my pocket. The sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows across the parking lot. When I reached room 112, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a piece of paper taped to the door. It wasn't a note from the manager. It was a thick, legal envelope with the logo of First Kansas Bank printed in the corner. My heart hammered against my ribs as I ripped it open. The bold letters at the top of the page screamed at me. Notice of foreclosure. It was for the farm. My father's farm. I scanned the document frantically. The monthly mortgage payment was overdue, but we usually had a grace period. My eyes darted to the bottom paragraph. Due to a reassessment of credit risk, the bank has exercised its right to accelerate the debt. Full payment of the outstanding balance is due within 30 days. 30 days! They had moved the timeline up. This wasn't standard procedure. This was a targeted strike. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. Robert J. Vance, Regional Director. I knew that name. I had seen Robert Vance smoking cigars with Charles Langford on the veranda of the country club. They played golf together every Sunday morning. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They didn't just want me broke, they wanted me dead. They were tightening the noose around my neck, squeezing the life out of my family's legacy to force me to my knees. I crumpled the letter in my fist, the paper crinkling loudly in the evening silence. I stood there, a woman with no husband, no job, no home, and no jewelry left to sell. But they had made a critical error. You can corner a frightened animal, and it might surrender. But when you corner a soldier, when you take away their escape route and threaten what they love, they don't surrender. They reload. I had no options left. I swallowed the last jagged shards of my pride, climbed into my rusting Ford pickup, and drove to the one place I swore I would never beg. The Langford estate. The storm had returned with a vengeance. Rain slashed sideways, turning the world into a gray blur. I stood before the gilded iron gates, pressing the buzzer repeatedly, drowning in the downpour. Finally, the heavy gates clicked open, but it wasn't family who greeted me. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez. She cracked the front door just an inch, looking at me with eyes full of pity and fear. "Miss Sophie," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "The mister said you are not to be admitted." "Move, Mrs. Alvarez," I said, my voice hoarse. "Please." I pushed past her, dripping water onto the pristine marble foyer. The living room was a different world. A roaring fire crackled in the massive stone hearth. Charles and Evelyn were lounging in leather armchairs, swirling glasses of vintage Pinot Noir. In the corner, Clark sat at the Steinway grand piano, his fingers drifting aimlessly over the keys, playing a soft, melancholic melody. It was a scene of perfect, warm, domestic bliss. And it made me want to scream. Charles set his wine glass down on a coaster. He didn't look surprised. He looked at me from my wet hair to my muddy boots, and a slow, malicious smile spread across his face. "Ah," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "The devoted daughter-in-law returns. Ran out of money already?" I stepped forward, leaving a trail of dirty water on the Persian rug. "Dad, please," I begged, hating the desperation in my voice. "I saw the foreclosure notice. I know the bank director is your friend. Just ask him to extend the deadline by 1 month. Just 30 days. I will pay it all back." Charles stood up, walked to the fireplace, and tossed a log onto the flames. Sparks flew up, bright and dangerous. "Why should I help an employee who abandoned her post?" he asked, watching the wood burn. "Speaking of which, Sophie, you are fired." The room went silent. The piano stopped. "Fired?" I choked out. "Charles, that is my only source of income. You know the medical bills." "Effective immediately," Charles continued, reciting the terms like he was reading a contract. "Termination for cause, insubordination, job abandonment, and conduct damaging to the Langford family reputation. In this state, employment is at will. You are out." "That is the price of stupidity, dear," Evelyn chimed in. Her voice was sweet, dripping with poison. "Did you really think you could fight us and still cash our paychecks? You are so naive, it is adorable." My knees felt weak. They had cut my lifeline. I turned to the piano. My last hope? My husband. Clark was staring at the keys, refusing to look up. He looked small. Pathetic. "Clark!" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat. I ran to him, grabbing the shoulder of his cashmere sweater. "Clark, say something." "Are you going to let your parents do this? They are killing my father. They are taking the farm." Clark flinched. He jerked his shoulder away from my touch as if I were burning him. He stood up quickly, scrambling backward until he was standing behind his mother's chair. "Sophie." "Calm down," he stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "You are scaring Mom and Dad. You are hysterical." "Hysterical?" I stepped toward him. "I am fighting for my life, Clark." I cannot interfere with company policy," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You brought this on yourself. You should just go." I looked into his eyes. There was no love there. There wasn't even anger. There was just fear. He was a coward, hiding behind his mother's money, willing to watch his wife drown rather than get his feet wet. In that moment, the marriage didn't just end, it died, rotting right there on the expensive carpet. "Security!" Charles bellowed. 2 large men in dark suits appeared from the hallway. I hadn't even seen them. They moved fast, grabbing my arms in a vice grip. "Get your hands off me," I screamed, thrashing against them. "You are monsters, all of you." They didn't listen. They dragged me backward, my heels skidding uselessly on the floor. I saw Clark turn away, picking up his wineglass with a trembling hand. They hauled me out the front door, down the stone steps, and threw me. I landed hard, face first. I crashed into the freezing mud just outside the iron gates. The cold ooze filled my mouth, blinded my eyes. I gasped, trying to push myself up, coughing up dirt. Clang. The heavy gate slammed shut in front of me. The lock clicked. I've never felt more alone than I did in that mud. If you believe that justice needs to be served for Sophie, please like this episode and comment "Justice for Sophie" below. Let me know you are with me. I lay there in the rain, shaking uncontrollably. The mud covered my face, matting my hair. I had lost the house. I had lost the money. I had lost my job. I had lost my husband. And worst of all, they had stripped away my dignity. I curled into a ball in the dirt and let out a scream. It wasn't a human sound. It was the howl of a wounded animal, cornered and bleeding in the dark, with nothing left to lose. I dragged my body back to Hutchinson Regional Medical Center like a soldier retreating from a lost battle. I could not go back to the motel. The thought of seeing that foreclosure notice again made my chest tight. The hospital was the only neutral ground I had left. I slipped into the public restroom on the first floor, locking the stall door behind me. I stripped off my ruined jacket and began to scrub the mud from my face and arms using coarse paper towels and freezing cold tap water. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was a stranger. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her skin was pale, and her hair was matted with dirt. "Is this it?" I asked my reflection. "Is this how Sophie Lee breaks?" I walked out and slumped onto the floor in the empty hallway outside the ICU. I pulled my knees to my chest, burying my face in my arms. I was exhausted. A bone-deep weariness settled over me. I just wanted to close my eyes and never wake up to this reality again. "Sophie Lee, is that you?" A voice, hesitant but familiar, pierced through my fog. I looked up slowly. Standing there, holding a reporter's notepad and looking utterly shocked, was Emily Carter. We had gone to high school together, skipped algebra to watch the Veterans Day parades, and dreamed of leaving this town. Now, a laminated press badge for the Wichita Tribune hung around her neck. "Emily," I croaked. "My God," she whispered, her eyes widening as she took in my bruised appearance and the mud still staining my collar. She dropped into a crouch beside me. "What happened to you? I heard about the accident on the scanner, but look at you." 10 minutes later, we were sitting on a plastic bench near the vending machines. Emily handed me a paper cup of hot cocoa. It tasted like watered-down chocolate and cardboard, but the heat seeping into my frozen hands felt like a lifeline. I meant to just say I was fine. I meant to keep my dignity. But the moment I took a sip, the dam broke. I told her everything. I told her about the accident, about Clark's obsession with the hospital bill, about Charles and Evelyn offering me $10,000 to dispose of my father. I told her about selling Mom's ring to the pawn shop for $200, and finally about being thrown into the mud outside the Langford gates like a stray dog. I spoke through hiccups and tears, my defenses completely shattered. Emily listened in silence. She didn't interrupt. She just clicked her recorder on and gripped her pen so hard her knuckles turned white. As I spoke, the shock on her face hardened into a cold, professional fury. "They think they are kings of this state," Emily said, her voice trembling with anger. "They think because they own the factories and the banks, they own the people too." She stood up, checking the battery on her recorder. "You are not alone, Sophie," she said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Go be with your dad. By tomorrow morning, all of Kansas is going to know exactly who the Langfords really are." I slept in the chair next to Dad's bed that night, holding his calloused hand. When I woke up, the world had changed. Emily had worked through the night. Her article was on the front page of the Wichita Tribune's digital edition. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "The Lone Warrior, when the elite trample on a soldier's duty." It was raw. It was truthful. It described the image of a daughter selling her mother's wedding ring to buy antibiotics, while her in-laws drank vintage wine by a fire. It struck a nerve deep in the heart of the Midwest, a place where people still valued family, honor, and the military above profit. My phone, which had been silent for days, suddenly began to buzz. Bzz, bzz. It wasn't debt collectors, it was notifications. Emily had set up a GoFundMe page linked to the article. I watched the screen in disbelief. Anonymous donated $5. Mary from Topeka donated $20. A user named SemperFi8E8 donated $50. The comments poured in like a flood. "We have your back, Lieutenant. Shame on the Langfords." Sent from a retired mechanic in Omaha. It is not much, but do not leave your man behind. $5 became 500, then 5,000. The number kept climbing, ticking upward like a scoreboard. I stared at the screen, tears blurring my vision again. But this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. I wasn't fighting Goliath alone anymore. I had an army. The people, the real people of Kansas, were standing right behind me. I dropped the phone on the bed and grabbed my father's hand with both of mine. "Dad," I sobbed, squeezing his fingers. "Dad, look. People are helping us. You have to fight. You cannot give up now. We are winning, Dad. We are actually winning." And then, it happened. It was faint at first, a twitch. I froze. I held my breath, staring at his hand. His index finger moved. It curled inward, scratching against the coarse hospital sheet. Then, the heart monitor on the wall changed its rhythm. The steady, slow beep, beep, suddenly spiked. The line on the screen jumped. Beep, 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 beep. I looked up at his face. Beneath the bandages, his eyelids fluttered. A low, guttural groan escaped his lips. The machine wailed an alarm, not of death, but of awakening. Nurses rushed into the room, but I didn't move. I just held on tighter. My father was coming back, and he was coming back to a war. 3 days after his index finger first twitched, my father opened his eyes completely. The first sound he made was a dry, rattling cough that shook his bruised chest. His voice, when it finally came, sounded like gravel grinding against concrete, but his blue eyes were clear. They were sharp. They were the eyes of the man who had raised me. "Sophie," he wheezed, trying to focus on my face. You look too thin." That small fatherly observation broke the dam I had been holding back for a week. I collapsed onto the side of his bed, burying my face in the coarse hospital blanket. I sobbed uncontrollably, reverting instantly from a 32-year-old officer back to a frightened little girl. I confessed everything. I told him about the foreclosure notice on the farm. I told him about selling Mom's wedding ring to a pawn shop for cash. I told him about Charles firing me, about Clark abandoning me, and about the humiliation of being thrown into the mud outside the Langford gates. "I failed you, Dad," I choked out, unable to look him in the eye. "I lost the house. I lost the land. I let them win." I waited for the disappointment. I waited for him to tell me I should have fought harder. But he didn't scold me. His heavy, calloused hand lifted slowly and rested on my head, stroking my hair just like he did when I scraped my knees as a child. But when I looked up, the warmth in his eyes had vanished. It was replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. "Those bastards," he whispered. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They dared to treat Walter Harris's daughter like a beggar. He took a ragged breath, fighting the pain in his ribs, and pushed himself up against the pillows. "Sophie, listen to me closely," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Do you really think I am just a wheat farmer?" I blinked, wiping my tears. "What?" "In 1985, Charles Langford was on the verge of bankruptcy," Dad said, the words coming out with military precision. "His canning factory was failing. No bank in Wichita would touch him. He came to me, begging." I stared at him, confused. "To you? Why?" "Because I had the cash from selling the mineral rights on the North acreage," Dad explained. "I bailed him out. I pumped capital into his company when it was worth nothing. But I made a deal. I became a silent partner." He looked at me intensely. "I own 25% of Langford Foods, Sophie, and not just common stock. I hold Class A preferred stock. I have veto power." My jaw dropped. The room spun. "But why? Why did you never tell me? We lived so simply. I drove a 20-year-old truck. Because I wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet," he said softly. "I wanted you to value hard work, not easy money. I trusted Charles to run the operations while I stayed in the shadows, but I made a mistake. His expression hardened, his jaw clenching. A soldier's trust is wasted on a merchant's greed. He coughed again, a harsh, wet sound, but he waved away the water I offered. They have been cooking the books, Sophie. For 10 years, Charles has been sending me falsified financial reports, claiming the company was barely breaking even to avoid paying my dividends. He has been stealing millions. He looked straight into my soul. I became suspicious last month. I hired a forensic accountant from Kansas City to audit them secretly. I was driving to meet him with the evidence when he gestured to his broken body. When my truck lost control on Highway 96. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. "Dad," I whispered, "are you saying—" "The roads were slick, yes," he said, his eyes narrowing into slits. "But I know my truck. The brakes didn't just fail, Sophie. The pedal went straight to the floor. That was not an accident." The realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just greedy, they were monsters. They tried to kill him to erase the debt, to hide the fraud. And when I tried to save him, they tried to crush me to keep the secret buried. "They think I am just an old sheep waiting to die." Dad smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had just woken up. "They forgot that before I was a farmer, I was a recon Marine." He grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "We are going to counterattack. Now." "What do I do?" I asked, feeling the soldier in me rising to meet his command. "Go back to the farm," he ordered. "Break the seal on the door if you have to. Go to the master bedroom. Pull up the rug in the closet. There is a floor safe." He leaned in closer. "The combination is your birthday. 12-05-92. I nodded, memorizing it. Inside there is a green dossier. It contains the original shareholder agreement from 1985, wet-signed by Charles Langford. It also has the preliminary report from the forensic auditor proving the fraud. "I will get it," I said. "Tomorrow is the annual shareholder meeting at Langford headquarters, isn't it?" Dad asked. "Yes," I replied, "at 900 hours. "Good," Dad said, leaning back against the pillows, exhausted but triumphant. "Prepare your uniform, Lieutenant. We are not going there to beg for an extension on a loan. We are going to collect a debt." He looked at the ceiling, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of honor that had been trampled on for too long. "We are going to collect a debt of blood and honor." I drove the Ford pickup like a getaway vehicle, tearing down the dirt roads toward the farm, leaving a trail of dust billowing behind me that obscured the setting sun. When I finally reached the homestead, the sight made my blood boil. A yellow padlock with the bank's seal hung on the front door, marking it as seized property. I didn't bother looking for a key. I went straight to the toolshed, grabbed a rusted crowbar, and marched back to the door. With one violent heave, wood splintered, and the lock popped off. I wasn't breaking in, I was coming home. The house smelled of stale air and abandonment, a ghost of the life we used to have. I ran to the master bedroom, shoving the heavy oak bed frame aside with a strength I didn't know I possessed, and dropped to my knees to pry up the loose floorboards in the corner of the closet. There it was, the floor safe. It was covered in gray dust, but it looked solid, unbreakable. I spun the dial, my fingers moving from memory. 12-05-1992. My birthday. With a heavy click, the door swung open. Inside lay a single, thick file folder. It was moss green, the edges worn white with age. I opened it with trembling fingers, and there, bold and arrogant on the yellowed paper, was the signature. Charles Langford. Beneath the agreement was a black leather ledger, filled with my father's handwriting, detailing every penny of dividends stolen, every falsified expense report, every lie. This wasn't just evidence. This was a death sentence for the Langford empire. I pulled out my phone and dialed Linda Thompson, the attorney Emily had connected me with. My voice was steady for the first time in weeks as I told her, "Linda, we have the ammunition." That dossier sat on the nightstand of my cheap motel room all night like a loaded weapon, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose, the air in the room felt charged with static electricity. I did not put on a business skirt. I did not put on the civilian clothes of a grieving daughter. Instead, I unzipped the garment bag I'd carried with me since the night of the accident. Inside hung my Army service uniform. The midnight blue fabric seemed to absorb the morning light. This was a ritual, a holy ceremony before battle. I set up the ironing board, and the iron hissed as it hit the damp cloth, pressing the trousers until the crease was sharp enough to cut skin. I pressed the shirt until it was stiff with starch. Then came the ribbons. I slid the rack onto the chest. National Defense Service Medal, Army Achievement Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, checking their alignment in the mirror. 1/8 of an inch above the pocket. Precision. Perfection. Each ribbon was a story of sweat, mud, and survival. Each one was proof that I had faced enemies far more dangerous than a greedy businessman in a tailored suit. I laced up my low-quarter shoes, polishing them until they shone like black glass, and checked my gig line, the alignment of my shirt placket, belt buckle, and trouser fly. Straight as a laser. I pulled my hair back into a tight regulation bun and placed the beret on my head, adjusting the flash over my left eye. I looked in the cracked motel mirror, and the tired, broken woman who had wept in the mud was gone. Staring back at me was First Lieutenant Sophie Lee. Her eyes were dry, her jaw was set, she was ready for war. Fully armored in my dress blues, I drove straight to the hospital entrance at 8 o'clock sharp. Dad was waiting in his wheelchair by the sliding doors. He had shaved, and he was wearing his old Sunday suit. It was threadbare at the elbows and hung loosely on his frame, but on the lapel, shining brightly, was his Vietnam veteran pin. He looked at me, taking in the uniform, and nodded slowly. A soldier acknowledging a soldier. I knelt beside his chair, taking his hand amidst the morning rush of the hospital driveway. "Ready, Dad?" "Not yet," he said, bowing his head. "Sophie, pray with me." We bowed our heads together. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Dad's voice was raspy but firm. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies," I whispered the next verse, tightening my grip on his hand. "Amen," Dad said, looking up with eyes clear and fierce. "Let's go, Lieutenant. It is time to collect." 20 minutes later, the Langford headquarters rose from the center of Wichita like a fortress of glass and steel, a monument to Charles's ego. I parked the truck right in front of the main entrance, ignoring the no parking zone, helped Dad into the wheelchair, and placed the green dossier on his lap. We approached the revolving doors, and 2 security guards stepped forward to intercept us. One of them reached out a hand, starting to say, "Ma'am, you cannot bring that." But he stopped mid-sentence. He saw the uniform. He saw the medals on my chest. Then he looked down and saw the veteran pin on the old man's lapel and the cold, hard look in my father's eyes. The guard swallowed hard, stepped back, and held the door open. "Go ahead, ma'am," he mumbled. I didn't thank him. I pushed the wheelchair onto the polished marble floor of the lobby. My military heels echoed through the cavernous space like gunshots. Click-clack, click-clack. The receptionist stopped typing. Junior executives in expensive suits turned to stare. The murmur of the lobby died down to a hush as we cut through the crowd like an icebreaker ship, looking neither left nor right. We went straight to the VIP elevator bank, and I pressed the button for the top floor, the boardroom. As the doors slid open, I pushed Dad inside and turned to face the lobby one last time. I saw the confusion on their faces. They had no idea that the foundation of their building was about to be blown apart. The metal doors shut with a heavy thud, sealing us in the steel box, and we began to rise, upward, toward the sky, toward the truth. The heavy oak double doors of the boardroom exploded open as if they had been breached by a battering ram. Inside, the atmosphere of self-congratulation shattered instantly. Charles Langford was standing at the mahogany podium, his arms raised in triumph as he finished a speech about record quarterly profits. Evelyn sat in the front row, clapping delicately with her diamond-adorned hands. Clark sat next to her, slouched in his chair, looking bored and eager for the lunch buffet. When the doors swung wide to reveal me in my full-dress blues and my father in his wheelchair, the room went dead silent. The applause died in mid-air. Charles froze. His face went from a flush of victory to the color of old ash. He gripped the sides of the podium until his knuckles turned white. "Security!" Charles screamed, his voice cracking with genuine panic. "Where the hell is security? Get these beggars out of here. They are trespassing." Two confused guards appeared behind us, but before they could touch my father's wheelchair, Linda Thompson, our attorney, stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway. She didn't look like a beggar. She looked like a shark in a gray skirt suit. "Hold it right there," Linda boomed, raising a thick stack of legal documents high in the air. According to Article 4, Section 2 of the Corporate Bylaws, any shareholder holding more than 20% of the company's equity has the right to attend any board meeting, unannounced, at any time. She lowered the papers and pointed a manicured finger at the old man in the wheelchair. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I would like to formally introduce you to Mr. Walter Harris. He is the owner of 25% of Langford Foods and the sole holder of the Class A preferred stock." A collective gasp swept through the room like a sudden draft. The other 12 board members began to whisper furiously, turning to look at Charles with suspicion. Charles was trembling now, clinging to the podium as if it were a life raft in a hurricane. I stepped into the center of the room. I didn't need a microphone. My voice, trained to give orders over the roar of helicopters, filled every corner of the suite. "You fired me for abandonment," I said, staring straight at Charles. "You called my father a burden. You called our bloodline failure genes that never amounted to anything." I took a step closer, my military heels clicking sharply on the plush carpet. But it was those failure genes that saved this company from bankruptcy in 1985. It was my father's money earned from sweat and dirt, that has paid for your bespoke suits, your country club memberships, and your arrogance for the last 30 years. "Lies!" Evelyn shrieked, standing up. "He's just a dirty farmer." "Linda, the screen," I commanded. Linda plugged a flash drive into the main console. The massive projection screen behind Charles flickered to life. It didn't show the fake profit charts Charles had been presenting. It showed the green dossier. Spreadsheets appeared, bleeding with red ink. Bank transfer records showing millions of dollars siphoned from the dividend pool into offshore accounts under Charles's name. The forensic audit report was undeniable. "This is embezzlement," a board member whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Evelyn's face went pale. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Her expensive alligator skin clutch slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a heavy thud. I looked at them. The three people who had made my life a living hell. "You have money, and you have titles," I said, my voice dripping with cold contempt. "But you are hollow. You trampled on loyalty. You spat on family." I turned my gaze to Charles. "Charles Langford, you are accused of grand larceny, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty." I looked at Evelyn. "Evelyn, you are an accomplice to the theft of millions." Finally, I looked at Clark. He was shrinking into his chair, trying to make himself invisible. "And you, Clark," I said softly. "You are the biggest coward I have ever known." I turned to the stunned board members. "As the legal proxy for Walter Harris, the majority shareholder, I hereby move to immediately remove Charles Langford as CEO and chairman of the board, and to remove Evelyn Langford from her seat as director." The room hung in suspense for a heartbeat. "I second the motion." A silver-haired man at the end of the table stood up. He was the representative for the Teachers' Pension Fund, the second largest investor. "All in favor?" he asked. Every single hand in the room went up. "Motion passed," I declared. The empire of lies didn't crumble slowly. It collapsed in seconds. The side doors opened, and 4 agents from the FBI's white-collar crime division walked in. Linda had sent the dossier to them 3 hours ago. "Charles Langford," the lead agent said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest." "No! You cannot do this! Do you know who I am?" Charles screamed, struggling as they spun him around and slammed his face against the polished table. Evelyn was sobbing hysterically, chasing after them as they dragged her husband out. Suddenly, the room was quiet. The board members were packing up, eager to distance themselves from the scandal. I stood alone in the center of the room with Dad. And Clark. Clark stood up slowly. He looked at the empty doorway where his parents had just been taken away, then he looked at me. He looked at my uniform. He looked at the power I now held. A desperate, pathetic smile formed on his face. He took a step toward me, opening his arms. "Sophie," he breathed, his voice trembling with false relief. "Oh my God, baby, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what Dad was doing. I'm a victim too." He licked his lips, his eyes darting around the luxurious room. "We can fix this, right? I mean, look at us. We own 25%. We are rich, Sophie. We can finally buy that vacation home in Aspen. We can start over." I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw him clearly. He wasn't just weak, he was a parasite. He didn't care that his father was going to prison. He only cared that the money tap was still flowing. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a profound sense of pity. "Do not come near me," I said. "But we are married," he pleaded, reaching for my hand. I stepped back, gripping the handles of my father's wheelchair. "It is too late, Clark," I said, my voice as cold as the grave. "You picked a side when you let them throw me in the mud. And you picked wrong." I turned the wheelchair around and pushed my father toward the exit, leaving my husband standing alone in the silent, empty boardroom with nothing but his greed to keep him company. 1 week after the board meeting, Clark found me in the garden of the rehabilitation center where my father was beginning his physical therapy. He didn't come empty-handed. He carried a bouquet of 24 long-stemmed red roses and a small velvet box that looked suspiciously like it contained a rock twice the size of my original engagement ring. He was wearing his best apology suit, looking humble and desperate. He found me sitting on a bench, reading a book while Dad worked with the therapists inside. Clark walked over and dropped to his knees right there on the grass, heedless of the stains on his trousers. "Sophie," he began, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. "Baby, please, I have been calling you nonstop. I brought you something. It is a flawless 3-carat diamond. It represents a new beginning for us." He opened the box. The diamond sparked in the sunlight, cold and hard. "We are partners, Sophie," he continued, his eyes pleading. "With your shares and my experience, we can run the corporation together. We can be the power couple of Wichita. Just come home." I looked at the ring. 6 months ago, that stone would have dazzled me. Now, it just looked like compressed carbon bought with stolen money. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I placed it gently over the velvet box, covering the diamond. "I don't want a partnership, Clark," I said, my voice calm and steady. "And I certainly don't want a new beginning with you." "What is this?" he asked, his hands trembling as he touched the envelope. "Divorce papers," I replied. "I signed them this morning. Irreconcilable differences. I'm not asking for alimony. I'm not asking for a settlement. I just want my name back." "But the company," he stammered. "I've already transferred Dad's voting rights to a blind trust," I said, standing up. "I don't need your corporation, Clark. I've taken back what belongs to my father to do some good in this world. As for you, keep your money. Keep the house. Keep the empty life you fought so hard to protect." I turned and walked away toward the glass doors of the rehab center. Behind me, I heard him call my name one last time, but I didn't look back. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted off my shoulders. The final chain was cut. I was free. 6 months later. The roar of a diesel engine was the only sound for miles. It was harvest season in Kansas. The endless ocean of green wheat had turned into a sea of deep, rich gold, waving gently under the vast blue sky. I sat in the air-conditioned cab of a brand-new combine harvester. It wasn't a luxury car. It was a beast of a machine, bought with the settlement money from the lawsuit against Charles. The header blade spun rhythmically, cutting through the stalks with satisfying precision, filling the hopper behind me with grain. I parked the machine near the farmhouse, which now had a new roof and a fresh coat of white paint, and climbed down the ladder. My boots crunched on the dry earth. Dad was standing on the wraparound porch. He was leaning on a cane, his recovery slow but steady. He took a deep breath, inhaling the dusty, sweet scent of the harvest. "Smells good, doesn't it, Sophie?" he called out, his voice strong again. "Smells like honest work." I walked up the steps and stood beside him. I wasn't wearing a dress uniform or a business suit. I was wearing my old flannel shirt, jeans, and a pair of work gloves. In my hand, I held 2 sweating glasses of sweet iced tea. "Yes, Dad," I said, handing him a glass. "Nothing compares to it." We stood there for a moment, watching the sun begin its descent, painting the clouds in streaks of violet and fire. We hadn't kept the millions for ourselves. Dad and I had agreed on day one. We established the Harris Relief Fund, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal aid and emergency financial assistance to veteran families facing foreclosure and medical bankruptcy. Emily Carter, my friend and the journalist who helped save us, was now running the operations in town. Every day, the mailman delivered a stack of letters to our mailbox. They weren't bills anymore. They were thank you notes. Letters from widows who kept their homes, from soldiers who got their surgeries, from families who were pulled back from the brink of despair, just like we were. I realized then that the victory wasn't destroying the Langford Empire. The victory was using the rubble of that empire to build a shelter for others. Dad took a sip of his tea and placed his warm, heavy hand on my shoulder. "You know, Lieutenant," he said, squinting against the dying light, a genuine smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You didn't just save my life back there in that boardroom. You saved the soul of this family. Your mother, she would be so proud of the woman you became." I looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to twinkle. I thought of Mom, and I thought of the long dark road that had led me back here. I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it was a smile of complete, unshakable peace. "I just kept my promise, Dad," I whispered to the Kansas wind. "Semper fidelis." Always faithful. Looking back on the storm I walked through, I realized something profound. The Langfords had millions in the bank, yet they were spiritually bankrupt. They crumbled the moment their lies were exposed. My father and I, we had nothing but our honor, yet that foundation held firm against the fiercest winds. My journey taught me that true wealth isn't defined by your net worth, but by the integrity in your soul. Money can buy a house, but it can never buy a home. It can buy companions, but it cannot buy loyalty. In the end, your dignity is the only currency that truly matters. I hope my story has touched your heart today. If you believe that family and honor should always come before profit, please hit that like button to stand with me. I really want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand alone to protect someone you love? Share your story in the comments below, or simply type "always faithful" to show your support for our brave veterans. And please, subscribe to this channel so we can keep fighting the good fight together. Until next time, stay safe and hold your loved ones close.